The 1920s, an era defined by wealth, jazz, and high-class vice, where people bought luxury cars and mansions on credit, and occupied themselves with movies, parties, and bootlegged alcohol. An era fittingly dubbed the Roaring Twenties of America, seemingly prosperous. However, this America was built on the ashes of war. The lower classes of society, and an economy destined to collapse less than a decade later, crafting a toxic society valuing wealth over all else. Human ambition, the compulsion to go back to the past, and infatuation with wealth are undeniable elements in the participants of the 1920 society. No work of literature may capture the duality of the 1920 society as faithfully as F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby, almost needing no introduction. This piece of fiction explores themes of love, death, sin, corruption, and inner conflict, all while delivering a narrative that captures the ambition of Americans, chasing the dream their country brandishes behind the window. Numerous adaptations of The Great Gatsby and its influence on our perception of the 1920s society have been attempted in the last century. From current artistic and modern perspectives of the overarching themes of the Roaring Twenties, and true recreations of F. Scott Fitzgerald's vision of this society with the help of modern technology, directing, acting, and creative perspective. But some attempts show more success than others, and comparing what each is able to accomplish and what each fails at allows us a greater insight to what exactly F. Scott Fitzgerald wants to tell the audience. The 2002 film G, directed by Christopher Scott Sherritt, is a modern adaptation of the Great Gatsby story and, while offering a perhaps interesting take on what this overarching narrative brings, does not deliver what Fitzgerald intends for the audience to take away about 1920 society. In contrast, the 2013 remake, sharing the same name as the original work, may be benefiting from the advantage of sticking directly to the original work, or maybe converting the messages and themes of the book better than other adaptations, successfully illustrates on the silver screen what F. Scott Fitzgerald interprets on paper about his society's values and their effects on people. The 2013 adaptation of The Great Gatsby was an ambitious endeavor, being about $105 million in budget, larger than the average budget for a feature film at the time, and hosting a cast of notorious actors in Leonardo DiCaprio, Tobey Maguire, Carey Mulligan, and Joel Edgerton. This lavish showing is often dismissed as cluttered and hollow compared to F. Scott Fitzgerald's source material, but captures the message of 1920s society wealth and ambition true to the text's vision. Luhrmann showcases his expertise at delivering eye candy to the viewer throughout the entirety of the film, but manages to capture some of the smaller details of the story that exemplify why the book was written to begin with. The opening scene of Nick receiving counseling on his experience in 1922 and recalling Gatsby captures the important motif of the green light representing Gatsby's dream of high-class life, and Daisy, establishing a strong foundation for faithfulness to the text. Nick's character is held true in many ways, but does represent one of the only true flaws with this adaptation in that Nick is made out to be completely innocent and a bystander in most all events of the film. The original material makes no effort to show how unreliable and perhaps narcissistic Nick really is, as Nick describes himself as inclined to reserve all judgments, younger, and vulnerable, but just a couple pages later digs into Tom with his own opinions, saying, "Now he was a sturdy man of 30, with a hard mouth and a supercilious manner. Two shining, arrogant eyes had established dominance over his face. It was a body capable of enormous leverage. A cruel body." No such descriptions are made in the film, and the most we see of Nick's character being anything but a kind-hearted bystander is when he decides to not tell Gatsby that George is hunting him down later in the film. Tom's introduction as an old friend of Nick and, despite his gruff demeanor, his friendliness towards him is very different from G's adaptation of Tom, and fits the character of Tom in the book, saying, I always had the impression that he approved of me and wanted me to like him with some harsh, defiant wistfulness of his own. Page 10. Daisy's charm is a core piece of her character and is the outstanding aspect of her when she is introduced in the original text. Daisy's voice was the kind of voice that the ear follows up and down, but there was excitement in her voice that men who had cared for her found difficult to forget, and is done faithfully in the 2013 adaptation, with Daisy being introduced almost like a goddess, enamoring Nick and the audience with the camera work and showcase of Daisy. When Nick, Tom, Daisy, and Jordan all have dinner together, Jordan's character is showcased during the argument Tom and Daisy have in the next room, paralleling Jordan's gossiping and eavesdropping nature in the text. Quote, "A subdued, impassioned murmur was audible in the room beyond, and Miss Baker leaned forward unashamed, trying to hear." Page 15. Later on, the imagery showcased of the Valley of Ashes does the description of this barren dumping ground justice. A fantastic farm where ashes grow like wheat into ridges and hills and grotesque gardens, where ashes take the forms of houses and chimneys and rising smoke, and, finally, with a transcendent effort, of ash-gray men. Page 19. Faithfully illustrating the Valley of Ashes is crucial to Fitzgerald's purpose, as the destruction of these cities and these people so the wealthy can become wealthier and become even more ambitious is a crucial point in why the 1920s society is as flawed as it is. Later, in Tom's apartment, a night of debauchery unfolds, and Nick is at the center, quite different from the source text, where, even though Nick describes himself being drunk, doesn't showcase any level of indulgence as exhibited in the 2013 remake. This can either be a deviation from the text, or shows the lack of unreliability that Nick has in the movie, where perhaps Nick left that out in the novel. Nick wakes up on his porch the next morning with no recollection of how he got there, but sees that he has received an invitation to Gatsby's party, which he indulges in later that night, and is surprised to see that all of the guests in Gatsby's parties come completely uninvited, meaning that Gatsby had a specific reason to invite Nick, and it is apparent a bit later on that it is because Nick will allow Gatsby to get closer to Daisy. The lavish decor of Gatsby's house is on full display in this party, and Gatsby himself captures the signature smile as described in the original text. It was one of those rare smiles with a quality of eternal reassurance in it that you may come across 4 or 5 times in life. It faced the whole eternal world for an instant. Page 33. The only deviation to Gatsby's character here, albeit temporary, is that he is made out to be a fantastical figure, which does align with the illusory image of what Gatsby is in the source material, but doesn't seem to stick out as much as what Fitzgerald would want the readers to believe in their first impression. A critical example of the corruption of the 1920s showcased in all its glory in the film is Gatsby weighing his card, saying his name to make a cop buzz off. And then we see the police commissioner himself in Gatsby and Wolfsheim's shady den, indicating that corruption has sinked in deep into many facets of the 1920s society. The desperate nature of Gatsby is on full display at the tea party scene in the 2013 remake, showing how meticulous, stiff, and anxious Gatsby is to have Daisy over, decorating Nick's entire apartment with flowers, and even almost sneaking through the window through the rain to leave when he gets too anxious to continue. When they transition from Nick's house to Gatsby's, the scene where Gatsby flaunts his wealth to Daisy via raining shirts upon her shows just how much wealth means to both Gatsby in achieving his goals and Daisy in the security and comfort wealth indicates to her. The breaking of Gatsby's illusion and his need to exhibit his wealth to Daisy shows both how important it is for him to get him and is a crucial step in realizing this character's motivations in order to analyze Fitzgerald's message. And both of these scenes do the source material justice in this regard. Later in the film, when the main characters, excluding the Wilsons, all go to the Plaza Hotel in the city, Tom confronts Nick about his intentions to steal Daisy from him, and this scene is very telling of both Daisy and Gatsby's character. When Tom reveals that Gatsby made his fortune through both selling over-the-counter grain alcohol and selling worthless bonds, a chain reaction first described in the book and a faithful adaptation in the film occur. Gatsby attempts to play off the accusations made by Tom, but it is clear the room's air has changed after this exposure, and Daisy faces away, clearly distraught by this revelation. Tom rubs in his winning situation by talking up Gatsby and clinking his glass. making Gatsby snap as he sees the last 5 years of work and perhaps his whole life slip away, turning into a violent outburst where he nearly punches Tom. This scene is the final nail in the coffin for why Gatsby tried so hard to muster all the wealth he has, and showcases in broad daylight what Daisy's intentions are when she gives up leaving Tom for Gatsby because of the insecurity and illegitimacy of Gatsby's fortune. Later on, when Gatsby dies at the hand of Wilson, the film takes the creative liberty of showing a scene that unfolds without the audience's view in the source material. They decide to make Gatsby believe that it was Daisy who was ringing the phone right before he died, when it was actually Nick. A minor change, but a significant one, could have been to make him believe it is Daisy at first, but then realize it is actually Nick, the only person who truly cared about Gatsby throughout the entire story. This point would have driven home Fitzgerald's message that the 1920 society corrupts morality through its effect on igniting ambition into obsession with wealth and an idealized lifestyle, and that once someone realized this, it had already been too late. Nick's commentary in the original text references this idea, describing how Gatsby probably felt before he died after realizing his dream was hollow and ill-begotten. Quote, "He must have looked up at an unfamiliar sky through frightening leaves and shivered as he found what a grotesque thing a rose is," showing how Gatsby's entire world and his dream would have seemed to him now that he realizes how unrealistic and immoral it actually was.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the eighth wonder of the world, the flow of the century. Oh, it's timeless. Ho!
No era better represents changing hip-hop culture than the 2000s, and no place represents hip-hop better than New York. The story of making it out of poverty and into luxury through rhyming epitomizes thousands of people's American dream in the Y2K decade. Here, drama, romance, thrill, mystery, and more categorizes films in this era, and the timeless story of chasing what we once had through status and wealth shines through F. Scott Fitzgerald's story. Therefore, connects to many and poses an intriguing opportunity to modernize a story made perhaps less relatable over time. G, directed by Christopher Sherrill and aided by Will and Jada Smith, attempts to capture the invaluable narrative of the Great Gatsby in a modernized and urban way. The potential to craft a faithful story that communicates Fitzgerald's original message cannot be denied. But G's best purpose in analyzing Fitzgerald's message and story is realizing the flaws and failures of it, and how other versions of this timeless tale do it greater justice. G tells the story of the Great Gatsby in a way that forces the tale of status and wealth to the back seat and instead focuses solely on the romantic situations the characters find themselves in, missing the point Fitzgerald tries to deliver from the get-go and only showing faith to the story and its versions of memorable events in the text. The film begins with the movie's stand-in for Nick, Trey, visiting his cousin Sky and her husband Chip, representing Daisy and Tom respectively. One important distinction immediately obvious is that the aspect of Nick's character of being relatively uninvolved in most situations unfolding is hyperbolized in G, with Trey, while being the first character we see, being barely present in many of the most important events in the film. Chip represents the prideful aspects of Tom's character, while shown by his infatuation with white supremacy, saying if we don't look out, the white race will be utterly submerged, but misses the scheming quality of Tom, and it is clear that Chip is hostile towards Trey for seemingly no reason. Completely different to Nick's relationship with Tom at the beginning of the book. Sky isn't introduced in the same way Daisy is at all, missing the vital charm of Daisy's character, and is only made up later in the movie, where she is zoomed in on by the camera for a few seconds, and the no-show of her charm is ever made clear again. The equivalent of Gatsby is introduced as a rich playboy named Summer G, who seems completely superior to everyone around him, missing the point of Gatsby's character in The Great Gatsby completely, to be someone who stands out, almost resembling a freak show. No rumors about Summer G are present, and no mystery except for his inconsequential past is present. The main conflict of the film is shared with the source material, Summer G, or Gatsby's journey to getting the love of their life back through their substantial wealth. But the difference is that the illegal and potentially immoral way Gatsby got his wealth is a critical point of analysis for Fitzgerald's purpose, and no indication throughout G represents the same idea that Summer G obtained his wealth illegitimately, seemingly only through his hip-hop success. Most characters outside of the core four of Gatsby, Nick, Tom, and Daisy have next to no counterpart in G. George being vaguely represented as a two-bit rapper named Craig, and Myrtle, Jordan, and Wolfshine having basically no counterpart at all. Vague references to the Great Gatsby are attempted every now and then, but hold no rhetorical purpose. The main conflict is solved rather abruptly, anticlimactically, and confusing, with Craig, after being told to get back at the man that his girlfriend is cheating on him with by Summer G, decides to try to kill Summer G for no reasons not clear in the film. Craig seemingly misses Summer G and kills Sky, the equivalent of Daisy in the book, letting Summer G go completely free for his journey of going back into the past and diminishing the point of the original story. No counterpart to the lower classes of society abused and exploited in The Great Gatsby is present in G, being a vital component of Fitzgerald's message of the vital flaws of chasing wealth. While G seems to fail at most things it attempts, its failures allow us to examine closely what exactly makes Fitzgerald's story special and the message it brings, allowing analysis of a faithful representation even more significant.